We've been closely following the release of information about Jeffrey Epstein and his apparent global sex trafficking ring and the people reportedly involved in his activities. And as we awaited on much anticipated new information from the newly appointed Attorney General Pam Bondi, there was a twist. Bondi just announced she is essentially launching an investigation into the FBI for allegedly hiding documents. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. We were on pins and needles all day today because we were expecting a new trove of documents in connection to infamous pedophile and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Attorney General Pam Bondi had told Fox News last night that her office would be releasing information connected to Jeffrey Epstein, something the new administration had vowed to make a priority, and that it was going to happen today, on Thursday. And on Thursday afternoon, what did we see? We saw a group of young conservative commentators who were outside the White House holding binders that said, "The Epstein Files, Phase 1. Now, at the time of this recording, we, the public, we haven't seen what that information is. Although, according to the New York Post, a source who apparently reviewed the file says it's over 100 pages, includes a list of contacts, but advised it was going to be bound to be a disappointment, quote, a disappointment for those looking for new information. And I mean, if you think about that, through the course of various litigation and the criminal trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's accomplice, who was convicted of her own sex trafficking and enticing and transporting minors for illegal sex acts charges, we already saw a lot of information that was made public. Flight manifest logs, documents, his address book, names connected or associated with Jeffrey Epstein. We all saw this. So the question becomes, what is really new? And that raises a very important question. Why? Because not long after those commentators left, we saw a letter from the Office of the Attorney General to the newly appointed FBI Director, Kash Patel. And it reads, "Before you came into office, I requested the full and complete files related to Jeffrey Epstein. In response to this request, I received approximately 200 pages of documents, which consisted primarily of flight logs, Epstein's list of contacts, and a list of victims' names and phone numbers. I repeatedly questioned whether this was the full set of documents responsive to my request, and was repeatedly assured by the FBI that we had received the full set of documents. Late yesterday, I learned from a source that the FBI field office in New York was in possession of thousands of pages of documents related to the investigation and indictment of Epstein. Despite my repeated requests, the FBI never disclosed the existence of these files. When you and I spoke yesterday, you were just as surprised as I was to learn this new information. By 8 a.m. tomorrow, February 28th, the FBI will deliver the full and complete Epstein files to my office, including all records, documents, audio and video recordings, and materials related to Jeffrey Epstein and his clients, regardless of how such information was obtained. There will be no withholdings or limitations to my or your access. The Department of Justice will ensure that any public disclosure of these files will be done in a manner to protect the privacy of victims and in accordance with law, as I have done my entire career as a prosecutor. I am also directing you to conduct an immediate investigation into why my order to the FBI was not followed. You will deliver to me a comprehensive report of your findings and proposed personnel action within 14 days. I appreciate your immediate attention to this important matter. I know that we are both committed to transparency for the American people, and I look forward to continuing to work with you to serve our president and our country." What a story, right? Look, the stories we cover on Sidebar, I feel, highlight just how scary the world can be at times and how important it is to protect yourself. Talking about that is particularly true online, especially when it comes to protecting your personal information. So whether it's spam, identity theft, online stalking, our amazing sponsor, Surfshark, offers an incredible solution to these issues with their alternative number feature. So this service, built right into the Surfshark app, lets you create an entirely new identity, complete with a random US phone number, email, name. This way you can keep your real number and details completely private. It is great for signing up for services or websites that maybe you don't fully trust. It ensures that your personal phone number stays free from spam. And also, with alternative number, you don't have to give your real phone number to strangers while shopping on various marketplaces. So if you're ready to take your online privacy to that next level, check out Surfshark in the description below or visit surfshark.com/alt-sidebar. Sign up now, get Surfshark's alternative number feature plus 4 extra months of Surfshark. To talk about this, I want to bring back on here on Sidebar retired FBI agent Colin L. Schmidt. He's also the founder of Kronos Investigations. Colin, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time. What do you make of this?
Well, it's a lot to unpack. So when I saw them walking out with binders, I was like, well, I would do a $500,000 embezzlement and I'd have 5,000 pages of documents. There's no way there's just 200 pages. So I did a little research in preparation for this segment, and they did do some releases of documents over last summer based upon some lawsuits that were filed by one, I think Cernovich was one of the right wing or conservative podcaster. So then when I saw the binders, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. So doing some more research, looking at there's two search warrants that are actually three search warrants that are very, very important. There was the one that was done down in Palm Beach back in 2008 or nine, I believe. I think all that data has already been put into the public domain. But then there was a search warrant done on his mansion, and in the research I did, apparently the FBI found some hard drives in a safe, but they didn't have the proper legal authority to
Right.
seize the hard drives, and then walked away, but then came back 4 days later. And I was reading this and I had a triple take. I was like, what? I've never heard of that, because once you do a search warrant, you hold the structure or the place you're at until you're completed. And that includes going out and getting new warrants. And then after he killed himself, they did the search warrant on the island, and they
Well, let me
sent
just back
several
up. Let me
FBI.
just back up for a second. My understanding is when they went to search his property in New York, they found CDs, hard drives, money, jewelry, passports. They were only permitted to
Right.
photograph this stuff. They come back and all that's missing.
Yeah, so they weren't they on their own, they only photographed it. And
Right.
they had to crack a safe, apparently. This is what was put in the public domain. But then they finished their warrant per se, but they left that stuff there to get another warrant and come back 4 days
Right.
later,
But they didn't get
which
it.
is not that's not proper FBI procedure,
Right.
or frankly law enforcement procedure. You stay until you're
Right.
done.
Right.
And
Right.
I've been on 100 warrants where I would have to sit and we do the wow, waiting on warrant, waiting on warrant. You sit there and literally, I've been on warrants where I've waited 4, 5, even 10 hours waiting for a judge to sign a warrant so we could go further and get what we needed. But the important piece of this puzzle is the warrant they did down in St. Thomas in his island. Nothing's been talked about that, but it comes right back. That's all part and parcel of the same case. So to say there's 200 pages of documents is completely ridiculous. There's probably hundreds of thousands of documents. And then if you think about the digital and evidence, you're talking about possibly terabytes of data that needs to be analyzed.
So I'm confused. Is it possible the FBI is refusing to turn over this material to Pam Bondi?
I doubt it. I think it was I hate to use the term miscommunication, because there's been so much drama over this with the FBI and the Department of Justice. And frankly, the FBI is in a little bit of a tailspin now with the new administration there. So I think there should have been a more of a concerted effort to kind of take an accounting of what the FBI has, and that probably would have been the first step to say, okay, this is what the FBI has, this is what we can release.
She says she has a source who says there's more information. You just said one binder doesn't seem sufficient. Maybe Pam Bondi says, is this everything? Her source is saying it's not everything. We don't know who the source is. Of course, there's that complication, but is there a scenario? I mean, where is the rest of this material that you mentioned? And it makes me wonder, would the FBI have any form of justification or legal reasoning to keep this information from the Attorney General, which is interesting because the FBI is under the purview of the Attorney General. So again, I'm confused as to where this information is, and B, would they have any justification to not turn the material over?
Well, kind of unpack that. So the U.S.
Right?
Or so the FBI is they're basically serving the Southern District of New York, which did the warrants. They were the prosecutors on this, so they're going to listen to what the prosecutors are saying. However, the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office is under the Attorney General. There is absolutely no case, no way, no justification if the Attorney General, who has been confirmed by the Senate, says I need this, that the FBI would say no. that is immediate termination and possible prosecution for obstruction of justice. There's absolutely no reason to do that, number one. Number two, I'm a little frustrated because once again the FBI may have put themselves on the hot seat again inadvertently, and they knew this was coming. I think they should have obviously had everything prepared, had a list of things that were ready to go, and basically communicated with her office and say, okay, this is what we have. This is what we're prepared to release now. That's unredacted, because there is a process of redaction for all those victims. You can't put that out because you're going to put their lives at risk. So there's a lot to unpack here, and frankly, there is a lot of evidence. If it's not there, then that's a whole nother problem, and that's another spate of investigations on why it's not there, because they seized it. You can't give it back. The guy's dead. Who are you going to give it to? You got to have it. If you don't have it, that's a problem.
What did you make of this line? So we're from the letter, by 8 a.m. tomorrow, the FBI will deliver the full and complete list of the Epstein files, and including everything, regardless of how such information was obtained. What does that mean?
Well, I think there's some frustration on her part. Number one, there might be some positioning on herself to make sure that her boss knows that she's doing everything she needs to do. And I think that she's a little frustrated that she wasn't communicated, because you got to remember, she's an attorney general from Florida. She doesn't necessarily know the processes of the FBI. She's going to learn really quick. And that might have been part of the problem here, is she didn't have somebody that has experience with these kind of matters to actually walk her through it, to say, okay, this is where the stuff would be. This is where it's at. This is what they would do. And this is how they would document what they have. Because really, before you look at the evidence, you need to look at the documentation or the receipts that the FBI left when they did these warrants.
When she says she's directing Kash Patel to conduct an immediate investigation and to prepare a report, what does that look like?
I think that it's going to come down to exactly what I said, is he's going to have to find the actual accounting of what was seized and provide that to her. And then she's going to go from there and say, okay, of these things, what do you have? And then the FBI will say, well, we have all of it. They better have all of it, quite frankly. And then at that point, she's like, okay, well, I want to put it in a manner in which I can release it or review it, so we can figure out what we're going to do with this mess. Because frankly, what happened today is only going to make this worse. And the American people are going to get more and more agitated and put more pressure on everybody to find out what really happened.
Do you think that we are overhyping or overestimating, I should say, how much there is out there? Because my understanding was there might have been criticism leveled at the FBI that they didn't obtain all the evidence they needed to. They didn't obtain all the flight logs. They only collected a small portion from pilots. They didn't interview everybody they needed to interview back in 2008, like pilots or assistants or staff members. Do you think it's possible that the FBI just doesn't have the information we expect them to have?
Well, that's a real tough speculation. I think as far as 2008, 2009, the FBI was kind of brought in at the back end of that after there was a state investigation. But as far as the 2019 warrants, as well as the 2021 warrants, I know the thoroughness of the FBI. If it's there, they would have gotten it, unless it's buried in a hole and not a reasonable person would have been able to get to it. So it really comes down to, the documents really aren't really going to show much. What it's really going to get into is the digital devices, the hard drives, possibly VHS tapes. Those are the things that purportedly were seized that need to be exploited to find out what's on these things. And then at that point, there needs to be a group of people to kind of catalog all of this and make sure Pam Bondi knows exactly what's in the custody of the United States government.
But if there are privacy issues, so if you have, for example, tapes where people are being victimized, those tapes wouldn't be made public to the American people, right? Those would be sensitive information. I don't even think a blurring or redaction would be sufficient, right? How much do you think, because of privacy and security reasons, that information would be released to the public?
I don't exactly. I don't think the explicit information, if there is an explicit activity on these tapes, should be released and it won't be released because you have to protect that victim. And the other thing is, what I would expect to come out of this is they may say, we don't want to release it because we're going to start looking into prosecution, because rape doesn't necessarily have a statute of limitations. Now, financial crimes do. And so they could basically reopen investigations and possibly and reconsider prosecutions of so-called influential people if they have the evidence to do so. But it really comes down to, instead of people focusing on the binders, they need to focus on the audit, the Doge audit. Frankly, maybe that's what they need, is Doge to go up to the FBI and find out exactly what they have there and give Pam Bondi an accounting.
What would federal charges look like for potential people who are maybe potentially implicated? We talking conspiracy? We talking sex trafficking? We talking transporting minors across state lines for purposes of illegal sex acts? You know, it was one thing for Ghislaine Maxwell to be prosecuted. A big question became, how could she be in this conspiracy alone, right? She was convicted of conspiracy. Do you believe that those are charges that are potentially on the forefront if this information is released?
Well, absolutely. So you just touched on the Mann Act, which is transporting a minor across for indecent, or actually transporting a person. It doesn't have to be a minor; it can be an adult over state lines for an indecent purpose. So but once again, I don't know if there's a statute of limitations on that perspective.
Sure.
But there were minors though, and from that I do know there's not going to be, that's a rape charge, and there's not going to be a statute of limitation on that. So exactly, it can be a conspiracy of multiple things going on here.
Before I ask, I wanted to ask you about Representative Andy Ogles, because he wrote a very interesting letter to Pam Bondi as well. How much will we know of this investigation conducted by Kash Patel and the report that's going to be prepared to Pam Bondi?
I don't. I doubt we're ever going to get a full accounting, because from what I've been reading and looking into it, there's so many tentacles to this and so many powerful people that are involved. I think what they're trying to do is basically feed the mob and make sure they give them at least something so they'll go away. But this is never going to go away. In the world of social media, the conspiracy theories are only going to get worse and worse as long as there's any shred of people holding back information. I believe that the whole thing should be put on the table and we deal with it, because this guy had been doing this for supposedly 30 years, and there were supposedly very influential people, and they harmed children. That's the bottom line.
And that brings me to my next point. So I wanted to quickly ask you about Representative Andy Ogles. He wrote a letter to Pam Bondi, and it was responding to, quote, reports that certain FBI agents are allegedly attempting to destroy critical records. Not clear who those people might be or where that information came from, but should you encounter any statutory barriers to the expeditious public release of Jeffrey Epstein's client list or other pertinent information related to his activities, to include circumstances in which any such documentation is housed in other federal agencies, I stand ready to assist. And then he talked about how he's drafting a piece of legislation called the Preventing Epstein Documentation Obliteration Act, or the PEDO Act. Reportedly would up the penalties on those who exploit or abuse children, would work to protect files in this case and maybe other cases. What should we take away from that message?
Well, I think he's just trying to score some political points, because he introduces a law that it's an act of Congress, right? So it's gonna sit there and languish away. And in terms of him accusing FBI agents of intentionally destroying property or destroying evidence, I highly doubt it, just based upon my knowledge of how this stuff works. And they would, if anybody was to do that, they would expose themselves to so many violations of federal law. They'd be sitting in a federal prison with some of the people they may have put there. So I feel like that's a stretch, and that might just be a talking point. I think this is going to come down to basically a miscommunication, and frankly, Pam Bondi's not necessarily understanding on how all this evidence was cataloged and how it's being held. But to be fair, somebody should have sat her down before any of this happened and explained to her how it works per se and where it's all at.
Well, it seems like her source is telling her something else. Not that she doesn't understand the protocol, but that people might not be turning over what needs to be turned over. Just a fascinating day so far. We'll see where it goes next. Colin L. Schmidt, thanks so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Take it easy.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.